All right. Hey, hi, hello. It's Baldy. Hold on, let me do a little gain swap over here. Uh, Not GameStop. Apparently that's going to the moon. Anyway, we're over here on Britannica.com looking at a list of wars because I was watching the Steak and Eggs podcast and I wanted a way to store all the information um of the wars recently, quote unquote, from the thousands up because I feel like when someone brings up, "Hey, when was World War II?" I did not automatically know that was 1939 to 45. I also didn't know that America got involved in 41 or 42, like 1941 or 42, because of Pearl Harbor. Like I didn't know, I don't know any of that nonsense, and I feel like that's important parts of history, or at the very least, I'll look less stupid in conversations when people bring it up. Another one that you might need to know is 1914 through 1918 is World War One. Um, this isn't for anyone really aside from me, so if you're bored, whoops. Anyway, let's start reading what these are. Norman conquest began 1066 and ended in 1071 in the United Kingdom between Normandy and England. It was the Battle of Hastings with William Fitzosborne, 1st Earl of Hereford, Harold II, Hereward the Rake, Tostig, Earl of Normandy, and I guess a lot more. Uh, it was a military conquest of England by William, Duke of Normandy, primarily affected by his decisive victory at the Battle of Hastings on October 4th of 1066, resulting ultimately in profound political, administrative, and social changes in the British Isles. The conquest was the final act of a complicated drama that had begun years earlier. Wow. Well, I guess that's how Britain got a bit more British. I wonder what kind of things he brought. Crusades from Christianity. Based. All right. This was 1095 to 1571. 8. Crusades, military expeditions beginning in the late 11th century. They were organized by Western European Christians in response to centuries of Muslim wars of expansion. Their objectives were to check the spread of Islam, to retake control of the Holy Land in the eastern Mediterranean, to conquer pagan areas, and to recapture formerly Christian territories. They were seen by many of their participants as means of redemption and expiation for sins. Between 1095, when the First Crusade was launched, and 1291, when the Latin Christians were finally expelled from their kingdoms in Syria, there were numerous expeditions. Damn. Okay. And this was 1095 to 1571, between Christianity and Islam. I didn't realize the Crusades were directly affecting another religion. I thought it was literally like, hey, we got to spread the holy word. All right. Genpei War. Japanese history. From 1180 to 1185, it was between the Minamoto family and Taira family. Genpei War, 1180 to 85. Final struggle in Japan between the Taira and Minamoto clans. The result in the Minamoto's establishment is the Kamakura shogunate. A military dictatorship. Oh, Oh shit, the military controlled the country. I guess when you're small like Japan, that makes sense. That dominated Japan from 1192 to 1333. Dang. The Taira clan had dominated the imperial government from 1160 to 1185. Minamoto Yoritomo, the son of the great Minamoto leader Yoshitomo, had been spared after his father's defeat in 1160 because of his youth, so he was too young for them to want to kill. Oh, now an adult, he capitalized on the growing dissent with Taira leadership on behalf of members of both the Taira and Minamoto families and organized a new revolt in 1180. He soon gained control of the strategic east coast of Japan and by 1182 was ready to advance on the capital of Kyoto. I like Kyoto. Kyoto's beautiful, dude. Look at this place. Known very much for their temples. Uh, but yeah. The Taira leaders fled, taking with them the infant emperor Antoku. In the sea battle of Danora, 1185, on the inland sea in western Japan, the Taira were finally defeated. The Emperor Antoku was drowned in the battle, losing a famous sword, one of the imperial treasures of Japan, supposedly brought from heaven by the first Japanese emperor. The battle became legendary through accounts such as the Genpei Seisui Ki, record of the rise and fall of the Minamoto and Taira. Interesting. This family struggle became a massive piece of history because they're just on such a small piece of land. And it almost became legendary. We got this sword from heaven. Bro, they live in an anime at all times. They are the main characters. That's fun. That's fun. Fucked up, but fun. Baron's War. Bit of English history. It was in England with Henry III, Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester. Baron's War, 1264 to 67. In English history, the Civil War caused by baronial opposition to the costly and inept policies of Henry III. The barons in 1285 had attempted to achieve reform by forcing Henry to abide by the provisions of Oxford. When by the Mise of Amiens, 1264, the provisions of Oxford were declared invalid by Louis IX of France. Some barons, led by Simon de Montfort, took up arms and in May 1264 captured the king at the Battle of Luz in the southeastern Downs. From then until his death at the Battle of Evesham in August 1265, Simon de Montfort largely controlled England and made important administrative and parliamentary experiments. A settlement was achieved by the Dictum of Kenilworth, 1266, and finally by the State of Marlborough, like the cigarettes, 1267, which remedied some of the baronial grievances. This is what? Costly and inept policies. They attempted to. Okay, what were the provisions of Oxford? Uh, In English history, a plan of reform accepted by Henry III in return for the promise of financial aid from his barons. Oh, so they were giving him money. Henry, bankrupted by a foolish venture in Sicily, summoned Parliament in the spring of 1258, the Easter Parliament, or the so called Mad Parliament. In return for a badly needed grant of revenue, Henry grudgingly agreed to abide by a program of reform to be formulated by a 24-man royal commission, half of whom were to be chosen by the king, half by the baronial party. The report of the commission, issued June 10th, is known as the Provisions of Oxford. The provisions, confirmed by an oath of community of the magnates, were to remain in effect for 12 years and provide the machinery through which the necessary reforms uh, could be accomplished. The government was placed under the joint direction of the king and 15-member baronial council that was to advise the king on all important matters. All high officers of the realm were to swear allegiance to the king and the council. Parliament was to meet 3 times a year to consult on further reforms. A justiciar was appointed for the first time since 1234 to oversee local administration, and the majority of sheriffs were replaced by knights holding land in the shires that they administered. Annulled by papal bulls in 1261 and 1262 by Louis IX of France in the Mise of Amiens, the provisions were restored by baronial action in 1263 and in modified form in 1264, but finally annulled by the Dictum of Kenilworth, October 1266. So the barons gained half the power over England because the king fucked up so bad he had no bread. Okay, that makes, and that was 1264 to 1267. All right, the barons, they got in. 100 Years' War. Hey, that's quite a few years. Over 100. 1337 to 1453. Sheesh. Um, Between Europe, Flanders, France, Spain, and the Kingdom of Navarre. All right. The Hundred Years' War was an intermittent struggle between England and France in the 14th 15th century. At the time, France was the richest, largest, and most populous kingdom of Western Europe, and England was the best organized and most closely integrated Western European state. They came into conflict over a series of issues, including disputes over English territorial possessions in France and the legitimate succession to the French throne. By convention, the Hundred Years' War is set to start on May 24, 1337, with the confiscation of the English-held Duchy of Guienne by French King Philip VI. This confiscation, however, had been preceded by periodic fighting over the question of English fiefs in France going back to the 12th century. Fief is a vassal source of income. Okay, so a fiefdom is just like a little spot that makes some money for the homies, and they were fighting over who is getting that bread. All right. Hundred Years' War, intermittent struggle between England and France, 1415, blah, 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 blah. That's all the same shit. The struggle involved several generations of English and French claimants to the crown and actually occupied a period of more than 100 years. By convention, the war is said to have started that time, 1337, May 24th, with the confiscation of the English-held Duchy of Guinea. Okay. So they was just arguing over money for 100 years to the point where they got their kids involved because I guess nothing else was happening. To learn from our past, I guess. War of the Eight Saints, papal history. That is a cool ass title. In Italy, of course, they got to make themselves superheroes. 75 to 78. War of the 18 War of the Eight Saints, conflict between Pope Gregory the Ninth or Gregory the 11th and an Italian coalition headed by Florence, which resulted in the return of the papacy from the Avignon to Rome. What the fuck is the papacy? Papacy, the office and jurisdiction of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, Latin papa from Greek papas, father, who presides over the Holy See. The term pope was originally applied to all the bishops in the West and also used to describe the Patriarch of Alexandria, who still retains this title. In 1073, however, Pope Gregory VII restricted its use to the Bishop of Rome, confirming a practice that existed since the 9th century. According to the Annuario Pontificio, the papal annual, there have been more than 260 popes since Saint whatever. Okay. Avignon, it's just a city, capital of Vaucluse, southeastern France. Okay. So, which resulted in the return of Pope Daddy from the Avignon coming back to Rome. In 1375, provoked by the aggressiveness of the Pope's legates in Italy, so he had legislation go out there, Florence incited a widespread revolt in the Papal States. The Pope retaliated by excommunicating the Florentines, March 1376, but their war council, the Auto di Guerra, properly known as the Eight Saints, continued to defy him. In 1377, Gregory sent an army under Cardinal Robert O. Geneva to ravage the areas in revolt, while he himself returned to Italy to secure his possessions of Rome. Thus ended the papacy's 70-year stay in France. The war ended with a compromise peace concluded at Tivoli in July 1378. So the Pope just kind of rolled them. He got what he wanted. So because they were more organized, they actually maintained more control. Based 100 years. Oh, there was another? I guess because it leads into 1400. 13 Years' War. Let's see. Polish. Between Poland, Prussia, and the Teutonic Order. 13 Years' War, 1454 to 66. War between Poland and the Teutonic Knights that began as a revolt by the Prussian populace against their overlords, the Teutonic Knights, and was concluded by the Treaty of Thorn, October 19th, 1466. In 1454, rebel Prussian groups petitioned Casimir IV of Poland for aid against the Knights. Casimir declared war on them, and in 1462 won the decisive Battle of Puck. In the Treaty of Torun, the Teutonic Order surrendered the eastern part of Pomerelia, my bad, and western Prussia. Eastern Prussia was a vassal state of the Polish crown with its own diet and administration and capital of Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, Russia, and the order was open to the Poles. So, okay, Poland had the Teutonic Knights over them, so they were like a vassal state. There was a Treaty of Thorn. Conclusion of 13 War. Let's see. It's not going to tell me what the treaty, what the treaty had. No. Okay. That just led me, my learn about this topic in these? Okay, foreign policy, Treaty of Thorn. All of Western Prussia, called Royal Prussia, was ceded to Poland, while the remainder of Prussia was held by the Teutonic Order as a fief of the Polish crown, though the order retained a part. Okay, so they kept a part of Poland for money, but they got some land back. That was the treaty. Hmm. All right. So Poland won a battle against its vassal in 1454 to 1466, or won a battle as a vassal of someone else since they were turned into a fiefdom, though ultimately they only got like half their land back. It's only a partial one. Hmm. Almost, almost in years I may recognize. War of the Roses in English history. Hmm. 55 to 85, just UK, the House of Lancaster and the House of York. Oh, how did the Wars of the Roses get their name? Thank you. The Wars of the Roses were fought between the houses of Lancaster and York for the English throne. The wars were named many years afterward from the supposed badges of the contending parties, the White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster. Both houses claimed the throne through descent from the sons of Edward III. Wars of the Roses. In English history, the series of dynastic civil wars whose violence and civil strife preceded the strong government of the Tudors, fought between the House of Lancasters and York for the English throne. The wars were named many years afterward from the supposed badges of the contending parties, the White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster. Okay. Competing claims to the throne and the beginning of civil war. Both houses claimed the throne through descent from their sons of Edward III. Since the Lancastrians had occupied the throne from 1399, the Yorkists might never have pressed a claim, but for the near anarchy prevailing in the mid 15th century. After the death of Henry V in 1422, the country was subject to the long and factious minority of Henry VI, August 1422 to November 1437. So, King died. King didn't last very long, during which the English kingdom was managed by the King's Council, a predominantly aristocratic body, so nobles took over. That arrangement, which probably did not accord with Henry V's last wishes, was not maintained without difficulty. Like Richard II before him, Henry VI had powerful relatives eager to grasp after power and to place themselves at the head of factions in the state. The council soon became their battleground. Mm. Great magnates with private armies dominated the countryside. Lawlessness was rife and taxation burdensome. Henry later proved to be feckless and simple-minded, subject to the spells of madness, and dominated by his ambitious queen, Margaret of Anjou, whose party had allowed the English position in France to deteriorate. Oh, damn. So he was dumb, and then he got overtaken by family members who weren't looking out for his best interests. Between the two roses, though. Oh, who won? Who won actually? Um, who took it? I gotta know that. A new phase of civil war began in 1459 when York, goaded by the Queen's undisguised preparations to attack him, rebelled for the. Okay, I missed a bit. I gotta know. Between 1450 and 1460, Richard, 3rd Duke of York, had become the head of Great Baronial League, of which the foremost members were his kinsmen, the Nevilles, the Mowbrays, and the Bourchiers. Hey, among his principal lieutenants was his nephew Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, a powerful man in his own right, who had hundreds of adherents among the gentry scattered over 20 counties. In 1453, when Henry lapsed into insanity, a powerful baronial clique backed by Warwick installed York as protector of the realm. When Henry recovered in 1455, he re-established the authority of Margaret's party, forcing York to take up arms for self-protection. The First Battle of Wars at St. Albans, May 22nd, 1455, resulted in a Yorkist victory and 4 years of an uneasy truce. So that. Oh. Oh, so was it just hopping between York and Lancaster the whole time? A new phase of civil war began in 1459 when York, goaded by the Queen's undisguised preparations to attack him, rebelled for the last time. The Yorkists were successful at Blore Heath, September 23rd, but were scattered after a skirmish at Ludford Bridge. This is just like a street fight, October 12th. Like they just went out and just started beating each other. York fled to Ireland, and the Lancastrians in a packed parliament at Coventry. The fuck? City, all right, some stupid city day, obtained a judicial condemnation of their opponents and executed those on whom they could lay hands. From then on, the struggle was bitter. Both parties laid aside their scruples and struck down their opponents without mercy. The cold-blooded and calculated ferocity that now entered English political life certainly owed something to the political ideas of the Italian Renaissance, but arguably it was also in part a legacy of the lawless habits acquired by the nobility during the Hundred Years' War. In France, Warwick regrouped the Yorkist forces and returned to England in June 1460, decisively defeating the Lancastrian forces at Northampton July 10th. York tried to claim the throne, but settled for the right to succeed upon the death of Henry. That effectively disinherited Henry's son, Prince Edward, and caused Queen Margaret to continue her opposition. Gathering forces in northern England, the Lancastrians surprised and killed York at Wakefield in December and then marched south toward London, defeating Warwick on the way at the Second Battle of St. Albans, February 17th, 1461. Meanwhile, York's eldest son and heir, Edward, had defeated a Lancastrian force at Mortimer's Cross and marched to relieve London, arriving before Margaret on February 26th. The young Duke of York was proclaimed King Edward the fucking Fourth at Westminster on March 4th. Then Edward, with the remainder of Warwick's forces, pursued Margaret north to Towton. There, in the bloodiest battle of the war, the Yorkists won a complete victory. Henry, Margaret, and their son fled to Scotland. The first phase of the fighting was over, except for the reduction of a few pockets of Lancastrian resistance. So, York won, literally won and decided, you know what, we don't even want to take the crown straight from Henry. We'll accept succession. So, after Henry's dead, her son just can't get it. We'll take it, but we'll let you keep ruling for now. I think that's fair. And then Margaret's like, nah, nah, nah. My son is the motherfucking king. This is his son. Nah, we fighting this. We fighting this. And she goes and she rolls in with less forces with York and basically takes out the rest of the Lancastrian resistance to reestablish power for her son. Wow. All right, all right. The next round of the wars arose out of disputes within the Yorkist ranks. Warwick, the statesman of the group, was the true architect of the Yorkist triumph. Until 1464, he was the real ruler of the kingdom. He ruthlessly put down the survivors of Lancastrians who, under the influence of Margaret and with French help, kept the war going in the north and in Wales. The wholesale executions that followed the Battle of Hexham, May 1464, practically destroyed what was left of the Lancastrian party, and the work seemed complete when, a year later, Henry VI was captured and put in the Tower of London. What is this anime? Warwick made an equally vigorous effort to put the government of the realm in better shape, to restore public order, to improve the administration of justice, and by confiscations and economies, to make the crown solvent. At the same time, both Warwick and his master were caught in the diplomatic schemes of the astute Louis the Ninth, or Louis the 11th, who had succeeded Charles the Seventh at the king as the King of France in 1461. He was still preoccupied with the power of Burgundy, and the English were to be pawns in the game he intended to play for the humbling of Charles the Bold. Is Charles the Bold Charles the Seventh, Duke of Burgundy? Duke Philip III, the son of Duke Philip III, the Good of Burgundy, Charles was brought up in the French manner as a friend of the French Dauphin. Afterward, Louis the 11th of France, who spent 5 years in Burgundy before his ascension. Oh, so he lived with him. Although he had shown no hostility toward France before taking over the government of Burgundy during his father's last illness, he thereupon gave rein to an ambition to make Burgundy independent of France and to raise it, if possible, to a kingdom. Oh, so he's just a dude who's like, you know what? I'm kind of running this shit. I'm I want this to be my kingdom, and France needs to fuck off about that. All right. Yet. Okay, so, and the English were to be pawns in the game he intended to play for the humbling of Charles the Bold, who was trying to form his own kingdom to secede against France, which was currently ruled by Louis the 11th, who came after Charles the 7th. Okay. So, yet Edward the Fourth was not prepared to submit indefinitely to Warwick's tutelage, efficient and satisfactory though it proved to be. It was not that he deliberately tried to oust Warwick, rather he found the Earl's power irksome. Edward's hasty and secret marriage to Elizabeth Woodville in 1464 was the first overt sign of his impatience. The Woodvilles, a family with strong Lancastrian connections, never achieved real political influence, but they climbed into the position of trust near the king, thus estranging Warwick still further. The open breach between the king and the earl came in 1467. Edward dismissed Warwick's brother George Neville, the chancellor, repudiated a treaty with Louis XI that the earl had just negotiated, and concluded an alliance with Burgundy, against which Warwick had always protested. Warwick then began to organize opposition to the king. He was behind the armed protests of the gentry and commons of Yorkshire that was called the Rising of the Robin of Redesdale. A few weeks later, having raised a force at Calais and married his daughter Isabel without permission to Edward's rebellious brother George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence, Warwick landed in Kent. The royal army was defeated in July at Edgecote, near Banbury, and the king himself became the earl's prisoner, while the queen's father and brother, together with a number of their friends, were executed at his command. So, okay, the king decided, I'll start supporting these Lancastrians anyway because he wanted his son to secede. He'd found the power that this earl had was a little too much. And the earl was like, all right, fuck around, find out. And then not only did he imprison the king, he murdered his whole family. Oh, by March 1470, however, fuck. By March 1470, however, Edward had regained his control, forcing Warwick and Clarence to flee to France, where they allied themselves with Louis IX and, probably at Louis's instigation, came to terms with their former enemy Margaret. Returning to England September 1470, they deposed Edward and restored the crown to Henry VI. And for 6 months, Warwick ruled as Henry's lieutenant. Edward fled to Netherlands with his followers. Warwick's powers insecure, however, for the Lancastrians found it difficult to trust one who had so lately been their scourge. While many of the Earl's Yorkist followers found the change more than they could bear, there was thus little real opposition to Edward, who, having secured Burgundian aid, returned from Flushing to land at Ravenspur, March 1471, in manners reminiscent of Henry IV. His forces met those of Warwick on April 14th in the Battle of Barnet, in which Edward outmaneuvered Warwick, regained the loyalty of Duke of Clarence, and decisively defeat Warwick, who was slain in the battle. On the same day, Margaret and her son, who had hitherto refused to return from France, landed at Weymouth. Hearing the news of Barnet, she marched west, trying to reach the safety of Wales, but Edward won the race to Severn. In the Battle of Tewkesbury, May 4th, Margaret was captured, her forces destroyed, and her son killed. Shortly afterward, Henry VI was murdered in the Tower of London. Margaret remained in custody until being ransomed by Louis XI in 1475. Edward's throne was secure for the rest of his life. He died in 1483. In 1483, Edward's brother Richard III, overriding the claims of his nephew, the young Edward V, alienated many Yorkists, who then turned to the last hope of the Lancastrians, Henry Tudor, later Henry VII. With the help of the French and of Yorkist defectors, Henry defeated and killed Richard at Bosworth Field on August 22nd, 1485, bringing the wars to a close. By his marriage to Edward IV's daughter, Elizabeth of York, in 1486, Henry united the Yorkist and Lancastrian claims. Henry defeated a Yorkist rising, supporting the pretender Lambert Simnel on June 16, 1487, a date which some historians prefer over the traditional 1485 for the termination of the wars. Holy shit, what a fucking... That was all over the place. There were so many fights. They were just like, Yo, it's on site. You Lancastrian and I'm York is on site. And then the king who's just like, oh fuck, I just had kids with all these people. I done fucked up. And then his current wife Margaret, who's just like, my son is gonna succeed this fucking throne if it's the death of me. I will fight every war. The British people got in with that. Wars of the Roses. Okay, I see why they brought it up. That was very interesting. Uh, where am I now? I'm gonna speed run through some of these now. Oh no. Count's War, the last Danish War of Secession, Denmark, which resulted in the strengthening of the monarchy and the establishment of Danish Lutheranism, as well as in a change in the Baltic balance of power. The war derived its name from Count Christopher of Oldenburg. Christopher unsuccessfully led the forces of Lubeck, the principal nobles of Denmark, and much of the Danish peasantry against Prince Christian, the Lutheran heir to the throne of the recently deceased King Frederick I, reigned 1523 to 33. Christian forces, supported by the naval power of Sweden, I know them, reversed some initial military setbacks by the end of 1535. They put down a peasant revolt that had spread throughout Jutland, defeating Christopher's army at Oxenburg, and destroyed a Hanseatic fleet, thus ending Lubeck's power in the Baltic. Also, in 1535, Christian subdued a Norwegian revolt against his imposition uh, of Protestantism. Although the wars was for all practical purposes over, Count Christopher held Copenhagen until Prince Christian's blockade of the city forced him to surrender 1536, July 28th. With Christian's confirmation as King Christian III, who reigned from 34 to 59 of 1500s, 1530 north, 1534 to 15, reigned 1534 to 59. The monarchy was made hereditary. The Reformation was established in Denmark, Norway. The Norwegian autonomy was greatly reduced. Okay. So Denmark kind of. So we got the So that's the Danes. Norwegians got a little overpowered. The Danish Lutheranism, I guess that's one form of Christianity or Catholicism or something. It's one of those branch of Christianity. All right. So that followed Martin Luther, and the Protestants. That was Catholic doctrines, three major forces in Christianity. Yeah, okay. And so it was a religious war, essentially, and the Danes win 34 to 36. Okay. And that's the Count's War. The Araucanian Wars. I ain't never heard this in my life. It's Chilean. A series of conflicts between the Araucanian Indians of Chile and the Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century. Oh shit, maybe I have heard of this. And one battle between the Araucanians and independent Chile in the 19th century. The Araucanians were nomadic hunting and food gathering people divided into three groups: the Mapuche, the Picunche, and the Hiluche. I don't know how to say these. Mapuche? Mapuche. The most numerous group of Indians in South America, more than 1.4 milli. Most inhabit the Central Valley of Chile, south of the Biobío River. Smaller group lives in Neuquén Provincia, west central Argentina. Okay. Historically known as Araucanians, the Mapuche were one of three groups. Okay. Uh, each settlement had a cacique or chief whose authority did not generally extend beyond his own village. The Mapuche cultivated corn, maize, uh, beans, squash, potatoes, chili, peppers, and other vegetables, and fished, hunted, and kept guinea pigs for meat. Ooh. They kept llamas as pack animals and as a source of wool. A man's wealth was reckoned in terms of the size of his llama herd. Hey, all right, Mapuche, llama-based guys. Picunche. They lived under influence and political domination. They were accustomed to outside rule and put very little resistance to the Spanish. So these were just not very strong versions of it. Haluche. They spoke the same language and federated for military purpose, but otherwise had little political and cultural unity. The Araucanians seem to have been somewhat influenced by the pre-Inca people and the Inca. The latter were unable to subdue them. So we have like the warriors. We got the absolute betas, and then we have the people. Okay. They spoke the same language and federated for military purposes, but otherwise had literal uh, political and cultural unity. The Araucanians seem to have been somewhat influenced by the pre-Inca people and the Inca. The latter were unable to subdue them. The Spanish first collided with Araucanians in about 1536, where the expedition of Diego de Amalgo penetrated the Chilean region. I'm not quite sure what happens here. But the death of Lautaro battlefield. What the fuck? Oh man, all right. It's not that long. I gotta figure it out because this first sentence doesn't give me enough. The Spanish first collided with the Araucanians in about 1536, when an expedition by Diego penetrated the Chilean region as far south as the Mal River, so went down a river. When Pedro de Valdivia's forces occupied central Chile and founded the city of Santiago in 1541, they were met with strong resistance from the Araucanians. So those three, Mapuche, Picunche, Haluche. Uh, in 1550, Valdivia pressed southward and found Concepcion at the mouth of the Biobío River, and that's where those people live. But in 1553, he and his followers were defeated by the Araucanians under Lautaro, a chief who had previously spent 2 years in Valdivia's service. Oh, so one of Pedro's people who was in Santiago bounced. Before his escape, Lautaro had learned some of the Spanish language and tactics, and possibly about the manufacture and use of gunpowder. Mm. After Valdivia's defeat, the Araucanians nearly captured Santiago, but the death of Lautaro on the battlefield and a smallpox epidemic among the Indians prevented it. Another chief, Capolican, Capolican, Capolisan, Capoli, Capolican, Capolician. That's what I'm saying now. Continued the fight until his capture by continued continued the fight until his capture by treachery and subsequent execution by the Spaniards in 1558. Thereafter, the Spaniards pushed the Mapuche into the forest region south of the Biobío, which remained the boundary between the two people for the next 3 centuries. Before the end of the 17th century, the Spaniards had defeated and assimilated the Picunche, and the Hiluche had assimilated into Chile's dominant mestizo population. In the 19th century, after the Chileans had annexed slices of Peruvian and Bolivian territory in the War of the Pacific, 1879 to 84, they subdued the remaining Araucanians in the south. The Araucanians had begun to raid German speaking settlements there in the late 1840s and thus prevented further expansion of the European population. After the Araucanians were defeated at the hands of the Chilean army, they signed treaties with the Chilean government and were settled on reservations farther to the south, where they have remained quiescent and aloof from the rest of the country. Alonso de Ercilla y Zuniga, a Spanish soldier who fought in the Araucanian Wars, celebrated the courage and martial qualities of the Araucanians in the epic poem La Araucana. This work is known as Aeneid of the Chileans. So they caused no trouble. They were like, all right, we lost. They took it gracefully. We'll take the reservations. But that's rough. I mean, they were there first. That they did own their BOBO. That was their vibe. But war is war, baby. Can't lose. Livonian War, Russian. Oh boy. 58 to 83. Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, and Russia. The Livonian War, 58 to 80, 1558 to 83, prolonged military conflict during which Russia unsuccessfully fought Poland, Lithuania, and Sweden for control of Greater Livonia, the area including Estonia, Livonia, Courland, and the island of Oesel, which was ruled by the Livonian branch of the Teutonic Knights, Order of the Brothers of the Sword. Yo, these Teutonic Knights are sick. German organization of knights, organization of crusading knights that began the successful conquest and Christianization of Livonia, most of modern Latvia and Estonia between 1202 and 1237. After German merchants from Lubeck and Bremen acquired commercial interests in the lands of the mouth of the Dvina River, German missionaries entered the region. In 1202, the third bishop of Livonia, Albert von Bixhoven, found the Order of the Brothers of the Sword, with the Pope's permission, as a permanent military body in Livonia to protect the church's conquest and to forcibly convert the native pagan tribes to Christianity. Maybe less cool, but damn. Consecrated by the Pope in 1204, the order adopted the rules of the Knights Templar. The order's knights, called Knights of the Sword because of their white cloaks were decorated with red crosses and swords, were required to be of noble birth and to take vows of obedience, poverty, and celibacy. They lived in district castles, each of which was ruled by its own council and a military chief, who was chosen by the order's Grand Master. The Grand Master, who served for life, was selected by the Knights General Assembly, which also elected the order's others officials as its annual sessions. In addition to knights, the order's membership included soldiers, artisans, and clerics. How dare you? In addition to knights, the order's membership included soldiers, artisans, and clerics. By 1206, the order had firmly grasped itself as the dominant power in the land of the Lives. The Finno-Ugrian people dwelling near the mouths of the Dvina and Gaja rivers, and by 1217 it had conquered not only the neighboring Latvian tribes north of Dvina, but also southern Estonia. Damn, these guys started going ham. Oh, Schwart, Schwartbrother Orden. Schwartbrother Orden. I don't speak German, but Sword Brother Order, I guess. That's kind of a sick. Orders of the Brother of the Sword. It's a base name. It's super cool. Oh, bam, 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 bam. Anyway, the Teutonic Knights, they ruled the Livonian, a part of the Livonian branch, uh, called Oesel, and Russia got involved. And in 1558, Ivan the Fourth, who I'm guessing is Ivan the Terrible, yeah, Tsar of Russia, pretty bad guy, uh, invaded Livonia, hoping to gain access to the Baltic Sea and to take advantage of the weakness of the Livonian knights. He seized Narva and Dorpat and besieged Reval. The knights, unable to withstand the Russian attack, dissolved their order, 1561. They placed Livonia proper under Lithuanian protection and gave Courland to Poland, Estonia to Sweden, and Oesel to Denmark. Oh, so Russia kind of freed them? Ivan was then obliged to wage war against Sweden and Lithuania to retain his conquests in Livonia. Oh, so he accidentally gave it back to them. Initially successful, the Russians captured Polotsk in Lithuania, Belorussia, and occupied Lithuanian territory up to Vilna. In 1566, the Russian Zemsky Sobor, Assembly of the Land, refused a Lithuanian peace proposal, but as the war progressed, Russia's position deteriorated. During the 1560s, Russia experienced severe internal, social, and economic disruptions, while Lithuania became stronger, forming a political union with Poland and acquiring a new king, Stephen Batory. Batory launched a series of campaigns against Russia, recapturing Polotsk and laying siege to Pskov. In 1582, Russia and Lithuania agreed upon a peace settlement, Peace of Yam-Zapolsky, whereby Russia returned all the Lithuania territory it had captured and renounced its claims to Livonia. In 1583, Russia had also made peace with Sweden, surrendering several Russian towns along the Gulf of Finland, its only access to the Baltic Sea, giving up its claims to Estonia. Okay. So this was just a war for land, and land was just getting thrown all over the place. It's, oh, 80 years? 80 Years' War, 1568 to 1648. It's the War of the Netherlands' independence from Spain, which led to the separation of northern and southern Netherlands to the formation of the United Provinces of Netherlands, the Dutch Republic. The first phase of the war began by two unsuccessful invasions by the province mercenary armies under Prince William I of Orange, 1568 and 72, and foreign-based rages by the Gezen, the irregular Dutch land and sea forces. By the end of 73, the Guzen had captured, converted to Calvinism, and secured against Spanish attack the provinces of Holland and Zeeland. The other provinces joined in the revolt in 1576, and a general union was formed. In 1579, the union was fatally weakened by the defection of the Roman Catholic Walloon provinces. By 1588, the Spanish under Alessandro Farnese, the Duke of Parma, had reconquered the southern Low Countries and stood poised for a death blow against the nation nascent, coming or having recently come into existence. Nascent? Nascent. Nascent Dutch Republic in the north. Spain's concurrent enterprises against England and France at this time, however, allowed the Republic to begin a counteroffensive. By the 12 Years' Truce begun in 1609, the Dutch frontiers were secured. Fighting resumed and formed a part. Fighting resumed in 1621 and formed a part of the General 30 Years' War. After 1625, the Dutch, under Prince Frederick Henry of Orange, boop, forgot about that. Oh well. Frederick Henry of Orange reversed an early trend of Spanish successes and scored significant victories. The Franco-Dutch alliance of 1635 led to the French conquest of the Walloon provinces and sustained a French drive into Flanders. The Republic and Spain, fearful of the growing power in France, concluded a separate peace in 1648 by which Spain finally recognized Dutch independence. Okay. Frederick Henry, he reversed the trend of Spanish success, scored significant, so he beat the Spanish. Then they formed the French and a Dutch alliance, and they conquested Walloon into Flanders. The Republic and Spain, fearful of France, concluded a separate peace, and they recognized Dutch independence. Interesting. So rather than allow France to continue its conquest, they gave up the provinces of the Netherlands to the Dutch in this 80 Years' War. Spain did so that it could end peacefully. All right. Uh, War of the Three Henrys is English. Oh, French. War of the Three Henrys, 87 to 89, the last of the wars of religion in France in the late 16th century, fought between the moderate but devious King Henry III, the ultra-Roman Catholic Henry I de Lorraine, and the Huguenot leader Henry of Bourbon, King of Navarre, and heir presumptive to the French throne, the future Henry IV. At Huguenot, any of the Protestants in France in the 16th, 17th century, many of whom suffered severe persecution for their faith. Okay, so he was Huguenot, so that's what made him different. He was a Huguenot leader, Henry of Bourbon. Then we had Catholic, and then we had a moderate. At first, the balance of successes was somewhat in favor of the Holy League, the Catholic faction led by the Guises, but Henry of Navarre, with English financial aid, did win the Battle of Coutras, in which the Duc de Juiz, Duch de Juiz, I'm gonna call this Dutch juice, the Duchy de Juice, one of the favorites of Henry III, was defeated and killed. Duck the guys, Duck the Geesey, Duc de Guise, Duc de Guise. I'm guessing this is French, right? Duc de Guise, on the other hand, was too strong for the Protestant Germans who had marched into France to join the Huguenots, and he defeated them at Vimory and Aulnoy, after which he marched in triumph to Paris. In spite of the orders and opposition of the king, who, finding himself powerless, withdrew to Chartres. Once more Henry III was obliged to accept such terms as the Leaguers chose to impose, and he signed the Edict of Union in 1588, in which he named Guise Lieutenant General of the kingdom, and declared that no heretic could succeed the throne. Unable to endure the humiliation, Henry III that same winter had the Duke and Cardinal of Guise assassinated and many leaders of the League arrested. The power of the League party, however, seemed as great as ever. Its new leader, the Duc de Mayenne, entered Paris and declared open war, creating mayonnaise on Henry III, who, after some hesitation, threw himself under the protection of his cousin Henry of Navarre in the spring of 1589. The Germans once more entered northeastern France. The Leaguers were unable to make headway either against them or against the armies of the two kings. They fell back on Paris, and the Allies hemmed them in. All looked as if the Royalists would soon reduce the last stronghold of the League, when Henry III was suddenly slain by a priestly assassin. Before he died, the king had time only to commend Henry of Navarre to his courtiers as his heir and to exhort him to become a Catholic. Within a few years, Henry of Navarre had allowed himself to be converted to Catholicism and had become the national sovereign as Henry IV. Wow. Okay, so I guess Catholicism won ultimately. Henry de Lorraine con- convinced Henry III, but Henry III could not accept the Huguenots from Henry of Bourbon at first, so he tried to rise up against them before he realized that that was a bit of a mistake. Then he hung under Navarre, who was the heir of the French throne. Okay, so who did King Henry III rule? Who did you rule? Okay, so you were the king of France, and your cousin literally convinced you to become Catholic. So Navarre convinced King Henry III after King Henry III had lashed out at Huguenot for celebrating that religion, and fear of that made him back up, go under Navarre, who became the next king, and made Henry III a Catholic in order to make the Duc de Guise or whatever chill out, the Roman Catholics. Okay, War of Three Henrys, bit over. All right, 1600s. My goodness, there's quite a few wars. Guess we'll get there, won't we? 80 Years' War, 1568 to 1648, the War of Netherlands, independence from Spain. Now, I just read this. Yeah, I did. Um, it was the War of Three. Oh, it's because it went into the next year. Yeah, yeah, yeah. 80 years. Very long. Goes into the next century. Kalmar War, Denmark, Sweden, 1611 to 1613. The war between Denmark and Sweden for control of the northern Norwegian coast and hinterland, which resulted in Sweden's acceptance of Denmark-Norway's sovereignty over the area. Denmark's king, Christian IV, declared war on Sweden in April 1611 after the Swedish king, Charles IX, claimed sovereignty over the old Finnmark region, a strategic point along the Atlantic White Sea trade route that had long provided the Danish-Norwegian kings with fish and furs. Growing Swedish power in the eastern Baltic and development of the Swedish port of Gothenburg beyond the Danish Sound Øresund were additional reasons for Christian's action. The war was named for the Swedish port of Kalmar, which fell to the Danes in the summer of 1611. Swedish Swedish fortunes continued to ebb, as their troops were forced out of Finnmark by the Norwegians. The port of Augsburg fell to the Danes in May 1612. The war ended with the signing of the Peace of Nared in January, or Kjared, I don't know, in January 1613. By this treaty, Danish Norwegian sovereignty over Finnmark was recognized. The Yalvsborg was to be held by the Danes, pending payment of a Swedish tribute, which was paid 4 years later. And ebb is just, yeah, the time when tide flows. Okay, that's figured. 30 Years' War? Is this another? Y'all be just measuring wars in time. It's not good naming convention. 1618 to 1648. Wow. In European history, a series of wars fought by various nations for various reasons, including religious, dynastic, territorial, and commercial rivalries. Its destructive campaigns and battles occurred over most of Europe, and when it ended with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, the map of Europe had been irrevocably changed. A brief treatment of the 30-Year War follows. For full treatment, see Europe History, the 30 Years, blah, 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 blah. Although struggles that created it erupted some years later, the war is conventionally held to have begun in 1618 when the future Holy Roman Emperor. Oh, guess I'll never know. Austria, Denmark, Dutch Republic, France, Holy Roman Empire, Poland. Everybody was just upset. There's a lot of battles, a lot of political things happening for those 30 years, but I guess that's when Europe became all funky looking. Powhatan War. North American. 22 to 44 in the 1600s. 1622 to 44, relentless struggle between the Powhatan Indian Confederacy and early English settlers in the Tidewater section of Virginia and southern Maryland. The conflict resulted in the destruction of the Indian power. English colonists who had settled in Jamestown 1607 were at first strongly motivated by their need of native corn, maize, to keep peace with the Powhatans, who inhabited more than 100 surrounding villages. The emphasis on cooperations was strengthened by the efforts of the Powhatan chief Powhatan and his daughter Pocahontas. By the time of Powhatan's death, 1618, settlers had discovered the highly profitable tobacco crop and were pressing increasingly into Indian territory for rich new land to cultivate. In resistance to this incursion, the Confederacy's new chief, Opachancanno, Powhatan's elderly brother in 1622, led his people in a sudden attack against colonists throughout the area, massacring 347 of a total of about 1,200. Intermittent warfare followed for 14 years. An uneasy claim was shattered in 1644 with a final Indian uprising in which 500 whites were slain. Determined British opposition, aided by Christianized Indians, broke the power of the warring Confederacy the same year, and Kano was killed. Damn. That was 22 to 44, and that was the thing with Pocahontas, the tobacco leaf. So they found tobacco leaf, and that's why they started colonizing so heavily. Interesting. Didn't even know. Bishop's War. 1639 to 1640 in British history. Two brief campaigns that were fought between Charles I and the Scots. The wars were the results of Charles' endeavors to enforce Anglican observances in the Scottish Church and the determination of the Scots to abolish episcopacy. A riot in Edinburgh in 1637 quickly led to national resistance in Scotland, and when in November 1638 the General Assembly at Glasgow set Charles' orders at defiance, he gathered an English force and marched towards the border in 1639. Lacking sufficient funds and lacking confidence in his troops, however, Charles agreed by the pacification of Berwick to leave the Scots alone. The First Bishop's War thus ended without battle. Misunderstandings broke out as to the interpretation of the pacification treaty, and Charles, having discovered that the Scots were intriguing with France, determined again on the use of force. To raise money, he once more called a parliament in English, April 1640. This short parliament, as it was called, insisted first on discussing grievances against the government, and showed itself opposed to a renewal of the war against the Scots. Charles thereupon dissolved Parliament and raised a new expedition on his own. The subsequent military success of the Scots in the Second Bishop's War and their seizure of the whole of Northumberland and Durham made it necessary for Charles to summon the Long Parliament, November 1640, thus precipitating the English Civil War. Damn, so they were trying to work with the Scots, but Charles was like, nah. And then Parliament was like, hey, come on, man. We got to do this. We got to try and appease the Scots. And then Mans was like, nah. So the Scots rose up and they were like, all right, you ain't going to change nothing. Is war, is on site. And then it became a civil war. Shit. Rough, rough, rough. Who won? Who won that? Battle of Newburn? Maybe that'll tell me. Decisive military encounter in the Bishop's War in which the army of Scottish invaders defeated English forces of Charles I and captured Newcastle, forcing the king to convene parliament and sacrifice unpopular policies and ministers. So the parliament wasn't good enough, and they were like, nah, nah, B, this shit's gotta stop. Okay, that's pretty funny. All right, English Civil Wars, 42 to 51. Fighting that took place in the British Isles between supporters of the monarchy of Charles I and his son's successor Charles II, and opposing groups in each of Charles' kingdoms, including parliamentarians in England, Covenanters in Scotland, and Confederates in Ireland. The English Civil Wars are traditionally considered to have begun in England in August 1642, when Charles I raised an army against the wishes of Parliament, ostensibly to deal with a rebellion in Ireland. But the period of conflict actually began earlier in Scotland with the Bishops' Wars of 1639 through 40, and in Ireland with the Ulster Rebellion of 1641. Throughout the 40s of 1600, war between king and parliament ravaged England, but it also struck all of the kingdoms held by the House of Stuart. And in addition to war between the various British and Irish dominions, there was civil war within each of the Stuart states. For this reason, the English Civil Wars might have properly be called the British Civil Wars and the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. The wars finally ended in 1651 with the flight of Charles II to France, and with him, the hopes of the British monarchy. And with him, the hopes of the British monarchy. Wow. It is 8 a.m. I've not gotten a single notification in 3 days. I record today 2 times. Go away. All right. English Civil Wars. So, I mean, 42 to 51, don't really care about these much. 22 to 44, that was cool. 1618 through 1648 is the 30 Years' War. That was major European change. 1622 through 44 was the Pocahontas thing. That's literally the chief was cool with them. They traded corn, and then they found tobacco and began colonizing. And then his older brother, after his younger brother died, was like, no, we can't have this. Or the Roses was a fucking anime drama. Counts War. This was the Baronies, I guess. Was that? Oh, this was the Danish War. Oh, that was Lutheranism. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. That was between the two sects of Christianity. War of Three Henries was another religious war. All right. Now, where was I? English First Northern War. There's a lot of wars in just fucking Britain and Europe, huh? But I guess Britain, they do be fighting amongst each other the most. First Northern War, 1655 through 60, final stage of the struggle over the Polish-Swedish succession. In 1655, the Swedish king Charles X Gustav declared war on Poland on the pretext that Poland's John II Casimir Vasa had refused to acknowledge him. The real reason was Charles' desire to aggrandize more Baltic territories. The Swedes, allied with Brandenburg, invaded Poland with initial success, but then Russia, Denmark, and Austria declared war on Sweden, and Brandenburg deserted the Swedes to join the coalition. The Swedes were driven from Poland, but twice invaded Denmark. The war ended with the Polish sovereigns renouncing their claims to the Swedish throne, and the Swedes acquiring Skane from Denmark. Huh. Well, goddamn. So he was like, I'm starting war because you're not trusting me as the king. I'm the king. And then he won it. So he got to say, yeah, this is my land. So, hey, good guys don't always win. I mean, there's no real good guys. Everyone's fighting. But War of Devolution, 1667 to 68, conflict between France and Spain over possession of the Spanish Netherlands, present day Belgium, and Luxembourg. Devolu- Devolution was a local custom governing the inheritance of land in certain provinces of the Spanish Netherlands by which daughters of the first marriage were preferred to sons of subsequent marriages. Oh. And Louis XIV of France began the war on the pretext that this custom should apply to sovereign territories also, so that his wife Marie Therese should succeed her father Philip IV of Spain in the majority of the Spanish possessions in Netherlands, in preference to her younger half-brother Charles II of Spain, a sickly epileptic, unlikely to live long or produce heirs. Oh, so he did this to try and get his queen to get more property because her brother was dying. Um, the settlement envisaged was much the same on Louis the Bas had agreed on, and so peace was concluded at Aix-la-Chapelle in April 1668, though not before Prince de Condé had overrun Franche-Comté with the French army. The latter provinces were returned to Spain, but France retained Bourgogne, Furnes. Okay, so they lost. Did they lose? Devolution, by which the daughters of the first marriage. Okay, yeah. So France lost, I think. Oh no. Oh no, Spain lost. They only got one province. But they France got everything else, I guess. Rough. I don't quite understand this war as much. I'm like the French army Marshal de Turenne advanced in Flanders May 1667, easily secured its objectives. Louis turned to diplomacy. 68. He concluded a treaty with Holy Roman Emperor Leopold, whereby they agreed partition of Spanish dominions between themselves on the Spanish king's death, in which it stipulated law how much territory in the meantime France was to annex in Netherlands. The French had also tried to win English support for their claims, but a new ministry in English turned instead to an alliance with the Dutch with Sweden. These allies sought to contain the French advance by persuading Spain to agree to moderate terms and by supporting Spain in war if this proved of no avail. The settlement envisaged was much the same as that on which Louis XIV and the emperor had agreed, and so peace was so concluded. I guess maybe it was just like they traded some land, and after a guy dies, someone gets money. I don't really get that war. Then 67 to 68 barely mattered. King Philip's War. In British American colonial history, war that pitted Native Americans against English settlers and their Indian allies, that was one of the bloodiest conflicts per capita in U.S. history. Historians since the early 18th century, relying on accounts from the Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth counties, have referred to the conflict as King Philip's War. Philip, Metacom, Sachem, Chief, or Wampanoag Band, was the son of Massasoit, who had greeted the first colonists of New England at Plymouth in 1621. However, because of the central role of the conflict played by Americans. Okay, so that ends. King Philip's War. Interesting. So this was a British Native American conflict. So this was like in Plymouth, like the landing of Plymouth, I guess, 1675 to 76. King Philip had a whole ass war. War of the Grand Alliance, 89 to 97. The third major war of Louis XIV of France, in which his expansionist plans were blocked by an alliance led by England, the United Provinces of Netherlands, and the Austrian Habsburgs. The deeper issue underlying the war was the balance of power between the rival Bourbon and Habsburg dynasties. There was general uncertainty in Europe over the succession to the Spanish throne because that country's Habsburg ruler, the epileptic and partly insane King Charles II, was unable to produce heirs. Upon Charles' anticipated demise, the inheritance would have to be through the female line, and through marriage alliance, the Bourbons of France could justly contest for the succession with the Austrian Habsburgs, headed by the Holy Emperor Leopold I. The aggressive foreign policy Louis displayed in the War of the Grand Alliance was thus formed of jockeying for position in anticipation of the death of the last male heir of the Spanish Habsburg line. Okay, so this is a continuation of that weird ass shit. In 1688, France had the strongest army in Europe, and its navy was larger than the combined navies of England and the United Provinces. Louis XIV wished to strengthen his influence among the German princes during the 1680s, when Leopold I was engaged in war with the Turks. To oppose this, the League of Augsburg was formed on July 9th, 1686, by Emperor Leopold, the electors of Bavaria, Saxony, and the Palatinate, and the kings of Sweden and Spain in their capacity as princes of the empire. This league proved to be ineffective because of the reluctance of the smaller princes to oppose France and the absence of provisions for combined military action. When Louis XIV received news of the Austrian victory over the Turks at Mohacs in 1687, he planned a short French invasion of the Rhineland while Austria was still engaged in the east. Louis sent his forces in the Palatinate with the promised support of King James II of England and the expectation that Louis's inveterate opponent, William of Orange, stadtholder of the United Provinces of the Netherlands, bro, your titles, would be preoccupied with his coming attempt to overthrow James and would thus be neutralized as an opponent of the French on the European continent. A French army marched into the Palatinate in October 1688. During the next year, the area was thoroughly devastated. Europe reacted swiftly. The emperor was able to hold the Turks in check and mobilize for a campaign in the west. Many German princes were aroused by Louis's actions and feared French annexations. Meanwhile, William had been quickly and completely successful in expelling James II from the English throne, January 1689, and the Jacobite counter-revolutions that Louis supported in Ireland was crushed by William, now William III of England, at the Battle of Boyne, July 1690. On May 12, 1689, the emperor concluded the Treaty of Vienna with the United Provinces for the avowed purpose of undoing the annexations of Louis XIV and restoring the peace settlements of Westphalia 1648 and the Pyrenees 1659. During the next 18 months, they were joined by England, Brandenburg, Saxony, Bavaria, and Spain. These formed the core of the Grand Alliance. The war also extended into the overseas colonies of the contending powers. England and France fought in the Americas, see King William's War, and in India, while the United Provinces and Brandenburg opposed the French on the Guinea coast of Africa. Instead of a short venture in Germany, France was now forced to fight a 9-year-long worldwide war for which it was not prepared. The war in Europe became largely a war of attrition, dominated by slow and careful sieges, such as the two sieges of Namur, 1692 to 1695. Major battles such as the French victories at Fleurus, 1690, Steenkirk, 1692, and Neerwinden, 1693, were comparatively rare and were never decisive enough to bring about a peace settlement. The Low Countries were the major battleground, with secondary theaters in Italy and Spain. William III led the Grand Alliance forces in most of the campaigns in Flanders. The French position improved somewhat in the course of the land war, but suffered more serious setbacks at sea, notably the passivity and deterioration of the French navy after its disastrous defeat at the hands of the Anglo-Dutch fleet at La Hogue, May 1692. In 1695, the French war effort was weakened by the death of their undefeated general, the Duc de Luxembourg. The stalemated struggle was very costly to all participants, and the members of the Grand Alliance responded with alacrity when Louis XIV in 1695 opened secret, separate negotiations. Savoy, which had joined the League of Augsburg in 1687, signed a separate peace, Treaty of Turin, with Louis in June 1696. A movement for general peace culminated in the Treaty of Witschwitz in September through October 1697. The treaty brought no resolution to the conflict between the Bourbon rulers of France and the Habsburgs, or to the English-French conflict. Both were renewed 4 years later in the War of the Spanish Succession.
The rise of England and Austria as effective counterforces to France, and the development of William III of the strategy of building and maintaining the Grand Alliance stand out as the significant features of this war. Okay. This is. Hmm. Huh. So people were colonizing, and then allies were like, "You're expanding a little too quickly." So everyone just shut it down. But they were also trying to expand, and then there was infighting because they had to like change up the rules essentially, and now it's a battle between military stuff. This seems really convoluted. Let's like they went through a lot. The rise of England. Okay. But they created counter forces to France, which was the largest developing spot. And then William III had a strategy of building and maintaining the Grand Alliance. So even though France was getting big, because that alliance was maintained, France was kept in check. All right. Promptness and response, alacrity, cheerful readiness. Hmm. And we'll go here King William's War. History of North America. From 89 to 97, North American extension of the War of the Grand Alliance waged by William III of Great Britain and the League of Augsburg against France under Louis XIV. Canadian and New England colonists divided in support of their mother countries and, together with their respective Indian allies, assumed primary responsibility for their own defense. The British, led by Sir William Phipps, captured Port Royal, Acadia, later Nova Scotia, but failed to take Quebec. The French and Indians, under the Count de Frontenac, carried out successful attacks on Schenectady, New York, Salmon Falls, okay, present New Hampshire, better name, and Casco Bay in present Maine. I think Casco Bay sounded cooler, but failed against their main target, Boston. The protracted war ended with the Treaty of Ryswick. Because of the importance of Indian participation, it is also known as the first of the four French and Indian Wars. Oh, so King William's War is the beginning of the French Indian War. Interesting. All right, we have quite a few years left, and I think I'm gonna cut it off here, and I'll do a part two for myself. This is all the old history. It's already an hour and 11 minutes long, and my voice is quite short. Goodbye.